What's this? Push button to watch a video.
The first church was organized at the Log Schoolhouse in 1871 by the Reverend Joseph Brown at where Main Street and New York Avenue are today. They built a frame building in the cemetery in 1874. I think that is the date. And in 1886 or 88, they built the frame building at the corner of Scotland Highland. It was named Andrews Memorial Chapel after my Uncle Will, who was killed at the age of 25 by a falling tree. The valuable parts of the church in the cemetery were moved to the northwest corner of Highland and Virginia in 1889 or 1890, including the very large, tall windows with small panes of glass. They must have been 8 or 9 feet tall and only 3 or 4 feet wide. This building was used as a schoolhouse and later on as the City Hall. The Faith Presbyterian Church is on Uncle Will's homestead. I have just sold this house and land that I own to my neighbor here in Union. This is the last of Uncle Will's homestead. I was a member of Andrews Church for 65 years. Of course, they changed the name in 1926 to First Church. Then I changed to Faith Church in 1960, I think because it was nearer.
Okay, we'll push to number 2.
My friends, neighbors, and associates, this is certainly an occasion that gives me one of the greatest pleasures of my life to aid in the laying of this cornerstone of our new bank building. When I first came to Dunedin, I never would have believed it possible that 58 years later, I would still be here, taking an important part in laying a cornerstone on which to erect such a structure as we are building here today. For over 20 years, the officers, directors, and stockholders of our bank have realized that the time was coming that we would have outgrown our present banking quarters across the street, but owing to the ever-increased cost of building any kind of structure, we postponed from time to time the commencing of this building. But the time has finally come when we have to have a much larger building in which to carry on our banking business, not only for the convenience of our officers and employees, but also for the better convenience of our banking population and friends.
The small depot had the unloading platform on the west side, and Main Street from the railroad to the pavilion out over the water was lined with oak trees with a roadway on each side of the oak trees. The Hotel Dunedin was there at that time. The station at Dunedin was what is still there, south of the brick waiting rooms and office that was built during the boom, somewhere around 1928, for 6 passenger trains, in addition to what they call the short that runs from Tarpon Springs to St. Petersburg every other trip out to the wharf. That made 2 round trips a day. 161, 2, 3, and 4 were the numbers of the trains.
The price had to be kept at $50 or less so that a gentleman and his son could build his boat in his garage or carport. That was the solution that we got to, was to build the boat smaller until it got to the right price. This was a budget boat from the very start. It was made out of a short piece of plywood instead of a long piece, and the price of the boat was pretty different on that account. I was trying to get a little boat shop started up in Dunedin. That was just something that just fitted my my desires. You know, I will build everything, anything or anything. So when he called me to tell me to come up and told me all about this idea he had, why, that was two of us that was really enthused. And we went right on with it. Well, of course, it was kind of like I was the mama of it. Not the papa, but the mama. I produced them. And it had a lot of laughs connected with it. It was being promoted by Optimus International. They put it across by pure, all those fellas driving and talking it up. But there's lots, I suppose, are better, but it fitted the need at the time, price-wise and performance-wise, and I'm proud that it went as far as it did, as well as it did.
I had a very terrible experience, 1957. It was foggy on 580, and we hit the back of the truck. My hand went through the windshield, and I was actually pronounced dead at Meese, but Meese would not accept blacks at the time. So they had to rush me to one plant. Thank be to God that these people saw what was going on. They resuscitated me, they healed this and that, and they treated me like an individual, not as somebody that was nobody. And this went on for several years. Dunedin had Meese had a very bad reputation when it came to taking care of blacks. One thing that was good about it was that the doctors, like Dr. Meese, and I knew these people because they played golf, and of course, and then I, helping my father at the golf course, so I knew them.
I guess my mother was one of the first women livers, and she didn't realize it at the time, but there was 2 or 3 of them in town that were women lived. And I remember that the street in Dunedin, from Douglas to the Bay, when they got to the bank corner, it was divided, and in the center there was the most beautiful row of big oak trees there. And when the men in the town decided to widen the streets, they decided they were going to take the oak trees out of there. Well, they decided they were going to, and the women decided they weren't going to. And we had practically an armed camp in Dunedin. On one side the women, and on one side the men. And I remember that Mrs. Farron said that she'd climb up in the tree and sit there before she let them cut the trees down. I think somebody stopped her, but the women just went down there and stood and dared the men. They almost had to forcibly remove the women from the spot to get those trees cut down. And of course my mother was very much in it too. She just thought that was terrible to cut those trees down. And she talked about it so much that the chief of police at that time in Dunedin said he wished they had dumping schools, because if they did, he'd certainly dump my mother. Shut her up.
The opportunity seemed to be in Florida, and the family, the Milwaukee Corporation, financed him. The family put in $25 a month to come to Florida, buy land, and plant oranges, which he did with gusto. He had fruit coming in by about, 83. Had fruit coming in about 88, 5 years. And by 1890, he needed a packing house. And the packing house started to fall apart. He needed a machine shop. And everything they had here had to come by rail from the north to Jacksonville, and then by rail from Jacksonville to Cedar Key, and then by coastal steamer from Cedar Key to Dunedin. So you had to be pretty self-sufficient. You couldn't go down to the hardware store and pick up repair parts. On his first trip down, he was on the little coastal schooner from Cedar Key to Dunedin, and he met Mr. Duncan, who was also from Milwaukee. And so they struck up quite an acquaintance and became lifelong friends. And Mr. Duncan had a friend who lived in Dunedin and told him that the soil and the annual rainfall and the Dunedin was an ideal spot for citrus.
My grandmother was born in February of 1895. They named her Myrtle after the wax myrtle that grows all over the island. She did go to school. However, I do want to mention that her father in the evening had been teaching her to read and write and do arithmetic. And he would tell her stories of his life, his growing up in Switzerland and his travels throughout the United States. He also played the violin and shared with her a love of music. However, when she was strong enough to row and handle a skiff, he allowed her to attend school on the mainland of Dunedin. He had dug a pass which shortened the trip into town somewhat. It would have been 3.5 miles, but with the pass, now called Sharer's Pass, it became a 2-mile row across the bay to the mainland. Myrtle was 9 years old at the time. She attended school for 4 years. That was the extent of her formal education. However, my grandmother was a highly educated person, and she had an aptitude, especially for scientific pursuits such as botany, biology, and she was a wonderful writer.
My maiden name was Sybil Rousseau. I was born in Manatee County at the little town of Oneiko, July 14, 1897. The stores in Dunedin, as I remember, there was a store at the corner of Edgewater and Scotland. It belonged to the Laux. The Laux lived upstairs, and their daughter, Mrs. Hope, and her family lived there too. But later, there was a store next to the dock, and that may have been the Douglas and Somerville store. It was owned by Mr. Gilchrist at the time that I remember. That store was burned down. It had a terrible fire one night, and it was burned to the ground, and he later moved up to a store on the railroad. It was later bought by the Bradsley. And there was also Mr. Pearson's store right across. It was next to right across from the Brumby place. The streets were dirt roads, and they didn't even have marl on the main shell. There was a dirt road from Clearwater to Dunedin, and then there were board sidewalks. And I remember sitting on the porch and listening to the people go by with their lanterns. They have lanterns because there were no street lights at first. And they would go by swinging their lanterns and plopping on the board sidewalks. And when they took the board sidewalks up to make cementers, why, they discovered a number of snakes under there.
Christmas started in 1904, early for my sister Doris and me, for we were going with our parents to spend the day with our grandmother, Mrs. Moore, in Dunedin. We were pulled sleepy-eyed from bed, given our Christmas stocking and toys, and then all headed for the depot, where we caught the modern coal-burning ACL train. The old wood burners, whose crews sometimes had to stop and chop the wood, were by now used for freight only. The distance to St. Petersburg from Dunedin was not great, but there were many flag stops. Dunedin in those days was a lovely village with no paved streets, but boardwalks and kerosene lights, complete with a lamplighter. It had beautiful trees and an unpolluted bay. To us, it was heaven on earth. Grandma lived in a big house in a small orange grove on the north side of Scotland Street, between Edgewater and Broadway. Besides citrus trees, there stood the pecan, the peach, and the persimmon. There was a big red barn rented out to the local grocer, E.T. Boozer, for his delivery team. It added to a wonderful place to play, and we made the most of it. After the clan was gathered, Aunt Effie, Uncle Moffat and Jim and their families, the women folks set to prepare a Christmas dinner. Turkeys were scarce, so we had fried chicken, chicken paloo, coleslaw, potato salad, sweet potatoes, candied in Southern style, guava pie, cake, cassava pudding. This was a period of wax candles, the holders of homemade decorations for the Christmas tree.
That freeze was the worst one we've ever had. It went down to 19 degrees and stayed that way all night and all day. And the second night it only got up to 23 degrees. And Dad said that the next day the crops were ruined and everybody was living on credit. And so they had nothing, they were wiped out. And so a lot of them just went off with a horse and buggy and drove back to Kentucky or wherever they came from, and left their house with the furniture in it and the door unlocked. And there was one lady, Blanche Emerson Williams, whose grandfather owned the Adolphus Emerson Groves. And the day before this great freeze, which was December 29th, 1894, a man came from Massachusetts with a check for the fruit. But she said grandfather was a man of great integrity, and he said, "I will not take your check until my fruit is in your conveyances, which will be tomorrow morning." And that night came this freeze, and in the morning he had no fruit. And Blanche said he was so sick and upset that he went to Tampa to his daughter's house, which was Blanche's Aunt Jessie, and he had a heart attack and died.
They took title on the name of the Dunedin in the north. Well, some of the regular residents associated themselves together and formed what they called the Dunedin Yacht. And they purchased Clearwater Island for $250 from the federal government. They took title on the name of the Dunedin Yacht in the north, 2/3 or 3/4 of Clearwater Island. And all the original, well, the only all year round resident that was active in the yacht club was L.B. Skinner, who was coming down from Wisconsin. He was a comparatively young man. He came down from Lexington. He bought grows and was a successful businessman. But he was part of both the all year round community and the winter resident community.
My oldest sister married, and she married our nephew, and he was down here operating a grocery store. They moved down, and they wrote me and advised me that Mr. Skinner, L.B. Skinner, he worked fruit pickers. So I wrote him, asked him if I could come down and put him in and pick fruit. And he said yes. He wrote back and said yes, come on. He had November 7th. So November 7th, I started picking fruit. And Mr. B.C. Skinner built this concentrate plant, first concentrate plant, where the Kelly Engineering is. And then he built another one up where Rhodes is. Well, that burned down, and he rebuilt. With him, and I worked with him then, finished the building up there. And I was production clerk for the machine shop and also the purchasing agent. And he sold out to the snow crop. And the snow crop sold out to Minute Maid. And Minute Maid moved everything they wanted out of there over to Auburndale and their other plants.
The newest I can say is from what my grandmother told me. They must have landed in Dunedin by sailboat in 1867 or 68. They bought a homestead claim from Mr. Holland. The barn was where my father was born in a log house. He was born April 4th, 1869 in a log house, and somewhere in the 80s or the early 90s, they moved from that part of the land to where the present barn is standing, and they built a 16-foot barn at that time for the boys to sleep in. And what house there was at that time consisted of 2 rooms, which was later the kitchen and the dining room. My father and mother and grandfather and grandmother and the babies lived in those 2 rooms a few years, and the boys would sleep in the barn. When the barn was added to, at one time it was used for a schoolroom, grandmother taught the school, this country school or private school. It wasn't a country school as far as I know. Then after the building was used as a school, it was used for a citrus packing house. Then it was turned back into a barn, and now it's just an old storage place.
In July of 1881, I went with Mother and Philip to Spring Hill to see Grandma Law. We traveled the first road built from Brooksville to Fort Harrison. Going to Spring Hill, we camped on Riles Branch. There I heard the wolves howling, the only wolves I ever heard. Riles Branch was on the southeast end of Big Prairie. Aunt Emily married Dick Garrison. Their homestead was on the Cootie River in Hernando County. Aunt Em had to go to the river to wash clothes. One evening, after finishing her washing and starting into the house, she had an intuition that something was wrong. And looking back, she faced a panther. She didn't lose her head, but faced him and walked backwards nearly a quarter of a mile back to the house. The panther followed nearly all the way to the house. I was too small to deer hunt, but enjoyed going with my brothers hunting. One morning, I took our hounds out for exercise and a little hunt. After about a 5-mile stroll, the ducks struck trail and soon had a bobcat on the go. After a short spell of hound music, they said, "Treed!" I was soon in the swamp at the tree. When I located the cat, he was over me and looking down with an awful grin. Just then, it took a very short time for me to shoot him out. That was the maddest wild animal I had ever seen.
I accepted Christ at around 8 years old. And I was baptized by a gentleman by the name of Reverend Mac James Williams. Mac James Williams was an excellent pastor, and he was an excellent educator. When I found out that he was educating all of the community at that time on the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King. So we started learning at an early age what it was that we were going through in the 60s and 70s. He was educating the community of what that was all about. It's about love, nonviolence. It's about all those things. We got all that information and love and courage from the church.
Well, I grew up in the church.
So did I.
And I can remember just like it was yesterday, it was Bible vacation Bible school, and Sunday school, and Christmas time. They had, everybody got a bill from type, those speeches for Christmas time, those speeches for Christmas time, and you learn. They tell you these speeches, and you do just what they always say you do. It was a wonderful memory.
That was a main part of our activities growing up. Going to church, singing in the choir.
When I went to both churches, the Methodist church would get out earlier because the preacher, Reverend Harris, I guess it was, well, I mixed up. He'd be up all day. He'd be late with the service. Methodist church would be finishing over, and then we'd come on down here. That's what we did. But back in that day, we had all kinds of services. We had 2 services, morning and evening, and then there was a service called BYP.
Baptist Training Union.
Yeah.
We used to have baptism, we used to take and walk right.
Well, it was a tight-knit group. You could go to your house, go to his house, go to anyone's home, and you felt like a child of that family, because the family took you in as a child of theirs. They loved you. They cared about you. We did everything together. We were boys that never lost contact with each other. We loved each other.
Everybody knew everybody. When I was growing up, discipline was given by everybody.
My mother made the biggest kid in Dunedin cry came show. He had done something to one of us. His mother who lived right across in front of us told my mama she wasn't going to beat him, told my mama to beat him.
If you got yourself in a jam or in trouble, somebody was always there to assist you and also discipline you.
Everybody in the community will whoop your butt if you mess up.
It was a family within a family. That's the way I look at it.
I didn't have the opportunity to roam, to go here and go there. Our main activities, my mom and dad went to work. When they went to work, they left work for us at home, to keep us home. And I was with my 3 brothers, and they gave us tons of work to do to keep us busy. And it was only 3 or 4 streets that Jackson Street, Douglas Avenue, Hancock, that's it. And I didn't really go down those streets too much. We were homebound. I was.
I was born on 438 Jackson Street.
I consider life here was pretty good, but you knew who you were. In fact, that's the first thing when you wake up in the morning. You knew who you were. When you pass a white woman, you pass with your neck like you had a damn bolt in it. If you were whistling, you cut that whistle off. You know? It was yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am.
Growing up, we were just taught our place. We knew our limits were basically Douglas Avenue. I felt very safe, even though there were some ugly things going on around me. For a long time, I was hidden from the children. And as you got older, you began to see some of the ugliness that was going on in the broader society.
I recall vividly my father taking my brother and myself to McCory, Dunedin and Clearwater. We couldn't go to the counter to get a hamburger. You could smell the fragrance of onions and hamburgers. And ask you, Dad, can we? Boy, shut up. Wait till you get home. Well, I knew doggone well there wasn't no hamburgers at home. I wanted one then. You know? But he knew that couldn't do it.
Stepping out of the community, you could see the racism. I don't know when they brought in Winn-Dixie. When I was a boy, I must have been about 9 or 10 or something like that when they built that store here. You could see colored fountain, white fountain. Matter of fact, the only people I know that had some friendliness or something about them was a place called Brian's Bakery. Then there was another, the Broadway Pharmacy. That guy was a real jewel.
If you went to the movie, it was the same thing upstairs for blacks, whites, whatever, whites down.
The white kids would come, they were downstairs, we were upstairs, so we had to come down some stairs. And sometimes they had little remarks that was not very good. And of course, there was some action going on as far as the fighting, and it was constantly. It wasn't just every now and then.
Sometimes whenever you hear, over here people say, boy, we had to get out of Palm Harbor, those white people who were friends. And they got after them, and they have fun.
No niggers, no Jews, and no dogs.
On the way home a lot of time, at night time when you go down there, people were throwing rocks and you had to run home.
When my grandmother and my grandfather was younger, that my grandmother was on the really lighter side and my grandfather was darker.
and they were not allowed, well, they were allowed to ride in the car together, but my grandfather had to drive her. She had to sit in the back and act as though he was her chauffeur. They could not, the police stopped him and told him that he could not do that. He could not ride, she couldn't ride up there with him. And they were married. They were married.
The adults pretty much sheltered us from that. We thought everything was fine. Even though when I was a little boy, I grew up, when I was a little boy, he still had to go to the back of the bus when I was a little boy. Still had to drink himself fountains. I was born during that time when I was a little boy. I couldn't remember that as something that was bad because I was sheltered from that. I didn't know that was wrong until I got older and realized that shouldn't have been. You know, that was the ugly side of America.
When he would go to town to buy groceries, he would carry me along and tell him, honey, the grocery man downtown, preacher boy. My dad ain't no bloke. Daniel, that's what he would call me. Everybody never called me Matthew. They would call me Nathaniel or Nat. You can't do that, boy. I'm not going to bring you downtown. That little thing in your mouth going to get you killed, you know. I always spoke my piece. It was something about this guy here that spoke his piece. And it bothered me the way they treated him. And that's been the story of my life, you know what I mean? But coming up as a kid, you know, it was good, but it was ugly.
I was born on 438 Jackson Street, 1937. My mother's whole family, it was 6 of us, kids that was born right there. My mother was one of the first women to have a kid at Meade Hospital. She was a black person, I mean.
You wasn't allowed to go in the hospital. He wouldn't take his patients here in Dunedin to meet at the time.
So if you needed surgery or something came up, what would you do?
You went to Clearwater, and they would put the blacks in the basement. They wouldn't even
at Morton Plant.
At Morton Plant.
Well, we were not allowed to go into the doctor's offices. If we went, I don't even remember going to any doctor's office. Do you remember? I remember when I had my son, I went to, well, when my mother had me, I would say, she went to, at the Morton Plant in Clearwater, but we were all black people. We went to the, were born in the basement. We were not in any rooms or anything like that when we were born. You had the babies and stuff, they put them out in the hallway. It wasn't like a nice place like they had upstairs, you know, with the nursery was upstairs. It was downstairs in the basement. They had all the babies lined up there. You know, segregated. That was segregation. Yes.
I was actually pronounced dead at Meade, but Meade would not accept blacks at the time. So they had to rush me to Morton Plant. Thank be to God that these people saw what was going on. They resuscitated me. They healed this and that, and they treated me like an individual, not as somebody that was nobody.
And there was a Dr. Winchester.
Yeah.
Who saw a lot of the, like,
patients. Were you allowed to go into his office, or did he visit you here?
I remember him coming to the house. I remember him coming to, when some people would get really, really sick, really bad, he would come to, you know, to the homes to visit, but we didn't. I don't remember going to his office.
Was that 50s, 60s?
It had to be in the 50s where I could remember that. Yeah.
I was so small I should have been put in an incubator. My uncle George Hooks worked for the Skinners, We had kids that were college graduates, nurses, that were able to take care of a kid that should have been put in an incubator. So I was, from a baby, stayed with him.
Niece had a very bad reputation when it came to taking care of life.
My mother got sick. My mother and Dr. Niece were very close together, and my grandmother. Okay, she's the first black person I know to have a room there. But we did not go in the hospital to visit her. I remember standing to the window of that room talking with her. And that's the way it was when my sister was born. But she was born at Nice.
What year was that?
Well, she's 69 now. You can figure it out from there. She's born the 10th of October.
When the house call would come around, they no show. They'll say, well, you know, maybe you need to wash your feet a little bit more. Little itty bit stuff like that. Degrading.
I had to be hospitalized. I had a doctor at Nice, Dr. Miller, but they didn't allow me. I needed surgery, and I had it in the basement over there to Martin plant.
Well, I was the first little colored girl to get my tonsils and adenoids removed.
At Nice.
At Nice, back in '46. And I remember down in the basement, but it didn't mean anything to me. Hey, what do I know? But as I got older, I realized why.
Dr. Winchester, you couldn't go in his house, but you could go to the porch portion, and of course he took care of you. And we were grateful for that, because you didn't have to go to Clearwater. And that was their prerogative, whether they want you in the house or not. But for a hospital to not entertain a life and death situation, that was bad business.
Where were you? At home, at the house?
At home. You know, in the world I could have been in these hospitals.
It was pretty crazy listening to, you know, about segregation, about the hospitals. This is the African Americans' voices, and I would have liked to have listened to all of them, but I kind of ran out of time. The place is going to close up, but wow, how they were treated back in the day is awful. It's really awful. All right, everyone, what did you think of this place? I just kind of, ooh, that's bright. I just kind of got you guys a little video. I was enjoying reading some of the stuff myself and listening to some of the things in that little room. It's a pretty neat place. If you're ever in Dunedin, make sure that you come check it out. It's $4 to get in. All right, be sure to check out Adventures and Vlogs with Thomas. I'll see you on the next video, guys. I love you. Bye.